All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Y'all can do better than that. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, peace and blessings. My name is Adam Jackson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. I want to welcome you here this morning and also just express some gratitude for the fact that you showed up at 11 a.m. for a very serious discussion on your Saturday morning. So give it up for yourselves for that. Clap it up. So just to kind of give you, I'm just going to kind of set the intention before we begin today. First, again, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, we are a grassroots think tank located here in Baltimore. What we focus on is public policy advocacy for the Black community. And a lot of times, in addition to advocating for policies that benefit the Black community, we also spend a lot of time trying to advocate against policies that harm the Black community. And so right now, we are in the midst of the 2024 Maryland General Assembly, as I'm sure Davon will mention some of the work that we've been doing this year around violence prevention, and I'm sorry, not about violence prevention, around reparations, and also preventing some of the criminal justice policies that have been going through Annapolis targeting our young people. And so right now, that's what we're in the midst of doing. And I just want to kind of mention right now, if you appreciate programs like these and Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, then I want to encourage you to become a sustainer. Part of the work that we do, people ask, like, how do you get funded? And we don't pursue grants. We don't pursue money from philanthropy because a lot of times that inhibits what you can do as an institution when you advocate for your community. You're typically beholden to large white corporate institutions. And so what we pride ourselves on, we are funded and sourced by the community. And so when people ask, you know, how did you pay for that report? How did you pay for that Uber to get to Annapolis? It's because people like you donate every month, as low as $5 to $10, as high as $100 a month. So just like we all pay for Netflix to get our favorite movies, you can invest in an organization that benefits our community. So I just want to encourage you to do that before you leave this afternoon. When we finish, you can see myself or Candace up at the front if you're interested. And I just want to also mention, you know, part of the reason that we're doing this program today is because what we kind of observed is that there was not enough folks in our community speaking up against Fox 45 and Sinclair Broadcasting. And, you know, if there's any people who work for Sinclair Broadcasting or Fox 45 in the room, I'm gonna make your job really easy today so you can leave in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So we see the poison that your institution is putting in our community. We see the propaganda that you're saying about Black people. And not only do we observe it and see it as something that is a problem, that we're gonna organize to stop it. And that's a part of what this program is here to do today. And part of the reason why it's so important to us is that because in Annapolis, what we've observed is that a lot of their propaganda is having an impact on legislators and how they see policy and how they see Black people in our community. And so it has an outsized influence on what we're on policy advocacy in Annapolis. All of that, Davon, our director of public policy, will go over during his presentation. But I just want to kind of encourage you to have an open mind and also participate in this conversation today. After Davon presents, we're going to also have a panel discussion with some really great thought leaders in our community. But before we begin our actual program today, I want to invite the Baltimore City Youth Slam team to give us, to kind of set the intention and to kind of open up the space for us this morning. So if you could give a round of applause for our young people to start us off in this program this morning.
Black boys in Baltimore, be born hummingbirds. A path to them is called a charm. That's why there's so much in our city. They're born sunsplit.
Too dark to be a phoenix. Our feathers are being plucked one by one. And one by one they go to the cage. And one by one they give us a name. Black, irrational delinquents they claim. We are birds, they say. We are dying by the aim. We are silly in our ways. Cause we bleed the color purple.
Black boys can never be birds, because we get our wings clipped before we take flight, going into a group of vultures, waiting to peck prey in pens.
Cause the best place to keep black boys is in prison, in a morgue. A cave is the only place where our wings can grow.
So they find their wings in court. They go from the nest to hanging off nets. Their parents are just happy their name's on a jersey instead of a t-shirt.
Or that they're on courts instead of cages. Then a hummingbird turns Oreo. They figure, if not basketball, then baseball is better than bondage.
Even the mockingbirds are beginning to cry. I never witnessed that sight with my eyes. I never thought of the time the death of the harmonized would plot. Our bodies would rot, seeds from the fertilized carcass of my black fellow breeders would heed.
A flock of ravens dead on the pavement for all to see.
Flying while you're alive is unrealistic when hunters get more sadistic. They give us meaningless apologies, giving us a dove to symbolize peace, knowing they killed one of us.
Empathizing, thinking they know what we're going through. When we can't say our birds fly, only that our birds flew.
But the black boy is tired of field work. So he runs in packs, selling packs. He knew a pack of gold was called a murder, but didn't know one was the myth committing one.
Our feathers are being plucked to make coats. There will be nowhere to fly till the marksman die. Generational salvation be the goals, and our minds be our stripped of our lives.
Playground tracks its burial ones, where they peck our feathers, feeling under the weather. Ravens blocking trees where we've been lynched, burned to a blaze and thrown in a cage.
When the arms of the hunter is raised, we can't bear these arms. Our wings will allow such things. We won't be another one of Jim Crow's we say. But these harsh feathers are dark feathers. We've been raving for this moment to end. We've been raving for as long as we can remember. Parents miss the quiet humming of the birds, waking them to the sounds of music. Now they're blackbirds, singing in the dead of night.
The black boy was just humming. Now the caged bird sings. Thank you.
All right, give them a round of applause for the young people. Like I mentioned earlier, Dave Love is our Director of Public Policy for LBS, and he will actually get us started today for the presentation about some of the work that we've been doing recently. And then we're going to move to our panel discussion, and of course, as I'm sure a lot of you are interested in, to get involved in our Q&A discussion portion of the program. If you're in the back, there's actually plenty of chairs up front right here, so if you want to come up, feel free. Don't worry, but I can disrupt the program. So I'll just bring up Dave Love right now. We're going to start. Let's give him a round of applause.
Good morning. Good morning. I want to reiterate, well, first of all, I want to thank the youth from the Baltimore Youth Slam team in their presentation. Not just for the purpose of what they shared, but also the fact that I think too often the most highly circulated images of Black youth are not the kind that we just saw, but images that perpetuate some of the things that we're going to talk about this morning and afternoon. So as Adam mentioned, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a presentation that does two things. I'm going to talk about the publication that we recently put out that's available at the front, Favorite Black Planet. I'm going to connect that to the conversation around the impact of Sinclair Broadcasting on our political landscape. And then we're going to go to a panel where they're going to react to the presentation, talk about some of their work and perspective, and then a Q&A. So that's the nature of how we're going to proceed over the next couple of hours. So Favorite Black Planet is something that we've been working on at this point for a couple of years. And so those who are familiar with the reference, Public Enemy, Chuck D, the emergence of hip hop, and they brought it heavily from Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, who's quoted in the report. For us, it was an opportunity to connect the phenomena of violence and crime with the larger system of racism and white supremacy. Too often, people see the two issues as at odds with each other. For those that are interested in addressing the impact of mass incarceration in the criminal justice system, that is often seen as at odds with dealing with public safety and violence and crime in our community. I think too often, for people who see themselves as progressives, who are interested in addressing issues of social inequality, I think sometimes make the mistake of attributing the entirety of the issue of violence to social inequality. And while that's a really important aspect of it, and one of the things we say in Favorite Black Planet is that an essential part of addressing violence and crime is dealing with social inequality and the policies that impact our community. But that can't be the entirety of it. And I would argue that too often, when we think about the short-term impacts of public safety, of violence in our community, we have to have some way to describe and talk about how to deal with the short-term impacts of violence and crime in our community. And so it's important then we think about what are the kind of interventions that are needed to address violence. So there's a quote that I've said a bunch, from Amos Wilson is paraphrasing his work on black violence. That to me is the most concise way of making the linkage. And he argues essentially that the phenomenon of violence and crime and homicide in cities around the country is an externalization of a suicidal impulse. That the way that this society, the propaganda, projects notions of Black inferiority and criminality makes it so that many of our young people don't value themselves. They see themselves as inherently criminal, right? See themselves as inherently violent. And then it would make sense then that their willingness to take each other's lives because they're taking the life of someone that looks like them. And in various points throughout Fear of a Black Planet, there are a variety of scholars that talk about, in many ways, the societal pain that people of African descent have been victimized by the society and the larger propaganda. And one of the impacts of racism and white supremacy is a disregard for the impact, the kind of psychological and emotional impact, right, of this propaganda on Black people. A part of what has happened is that conservatives and moderates have landed at the mainstream of the past. There's a willingness to talk about mass incarceration. But one of the things that has happened is that there's this notion that the non-violent drug offender is like the instrument of mass incarceration. And while this is kind of a laudable notion because it's an attempt to change the approach to dealing with the impact of the war on drugs from an issue of a criminal justice response to a public health response, right? That was the intention around focusing on the solution not about the drug offender. But it's just inaccurate in terms of understanding what drives mass incarceration. So again, war on drugs is something that's very popular, it's fairly mainstream, but what we have to understand is that the war on drugs, it wasn't just about criminalizing drugs. It was about criminalizing activity targeted at people in communities that people disregard. And so part of that means that if you live in a community where there is violence, if you have a friend that sells drugs or possesses drugs, if you live in a house with someone that carries a firearm because they see it as a need for protection, or if you yourself carry a firearm because you feel like you need it for protection in the community where there's violence. If you get to a gang, right, the social factor that is needed to make folks feel loved and supported, right, and gangs on that path. Those are all the things that have been criminalized by the war on drugs. And the criminalization of their proximity to the community is what is fueling the war on drugs. Another way of saying it is that everybody in the communities impacted by the war on drugs are potential drug users proven otherwise, right? That is the kind of thing by which the war on drugs is not. But if you know what we think about the notion of the drug deal, we go back to the 1950s. Of the pop culture images of Black people. One of the things I mentioned on the notion of a crack baby, right? So we think about the language, the words that were used to describe, Black people as a people, and there were the notions of quote unquote scientific research on this issue, this notion that the exposure of Black people could use this psychologically inherently pathological. Screening people. What's important to note, though, is that there's actually no such medical entity as a crack baby. In other words, there is no scientific medical distinction between a child who is exposed to their mother's womb to alcohol or other things of drugs and crack, right? But it was a pop culture term that was used as a way to advance the notion of the inherent mentality of Black people. Similarly, when you think about the notion of a drug dealer, right, there's a general category. When you think about a drug dealer, you think about a person that is violent, that is regard for violence. But we have to recognize that, and this is about to be something that for a lot of people in kind of a respectability world, it's something that people won't sell. But unfortunately, some of the greatest access to capital that working class Black people have has been the illicit market. So folks that are operating that have In a circumstance or a situation where, in terms of their access to resources, that vehicle means that it's being used, right? So part of the purpose of intervention is important, right? That make it so that there are other ways that people think are viable in terms of reaching economic mobility. But again, all of the things that I'm describing are things that are rendered invisible as kind of an aside, right? That's not emphasized. And so there's a way that so again, the notion of the drug dealer as some generalized notion of an inherently pathological usually black man prone to violence, and that everybody who lives in the communities that are proximate to it are drug dealers until proven otherwise. So when we talk about the impact of the war on drugs, this is its impact. And many of the policies that we're going to talk about later are examples of criminalizing said activity. And then additionally, so before I transition to talking specifically about Sinclair Broadcasting and Fox 45, there's also the inherent pathologies that are attributed to Black people engender an indifference to the life-altering consequences of interacting with the criminal justice system. So one of the things I'm going to talk about, like one of the in the approach of Fox 45 is to project many of the most brutal, heinous examples of violence committed by folks in our community. And what that does is that it creates a perception, right, that is many or most of our young people that is overrepresented in terms of what actually exists in our community. This is not the fact that there are things that happen, but that focusing on those images, right, creates an attitude and perspective, right, about the community that triggers people to certain kinds of action, right? And we're going to talk about some of those policies. But on the flip side, that because there aren't the stories that are as spectacles, that what you have is the stories of people, for instance, whether you look at the Department of Justice report from 2016, whether you look at the Graham report looking at Prince George's County in 2020, whether you look at the Step 2 report that was done about an extension of the Gun Trace Task Force, the Restoring Trust and Policing Commission report, these are all reports that actually document many of the forms of brutality that law enforcement, for instance, have done to Black people, particularly Black youth. Stories of people being strip searched, right, on a regular basis, right? Examples of young people being beat up, right? Examples of ways in which law enforcement was robbing people and selling drugs, right? These are the things that impact working class Black people that are rendered invisible. And I would argue that the invisibility of those forms of violence against our community is the result of the lack of regard for our community, which is again an example of the way that race supremacy operates in our society. So I'm going to talk about how. So this is, and we did an event last year. We talked more extensively about the publication "Fear of a Black Planet." What I want to do now, though, is I want to connect some of the major arguments made in that piece, this issue of Sinclair Broadcasting and Fox 45, and extend on what Adam mentioned in the beginning about why we're focusing so much on it. I mentioned just a moment ago the approach that Fox 45 takes to its coverage, right? And it's important to know, and I'm sure Senator Carter is going to be on the panel later that will talk more in depth about the juvenile justice that's being moved through the Maryland General Assembly. That we argue the extension of the same criminalization that many of us say that folks are supposed to be moving away from, right? So we're going to talk more about that. But what I want to convey is that Fox 45 is amplifying narrative that I mentioned that is meant in favor of Black Planet for the purposes of reinforcing so there's a generalized critique of media. So in some ways, Fox 45 is not unique in the sense that the portrayals of Black people reduces in terms of like the hypersexualization, images of us being prone to violence. Those are the images that are highly circulated about Black people. There's a societal propaganda, right, that projects Black people. There's a history of it, right? There's a history of Black people being projected in those ways. So that's something that goes kind of across the board. And it's something that, again, is not unique to Fox 45. Additionally, one of the impacts of media is that Black people being seen primarily as dysfunction that needs to be fixed, right? So many of the images we see are like, what's wrong with Black people? What are the negative things Black folks are doing, right? And to the extent that there are positive things that are novel, right? They're seen as exceptions to the overarching rule that Black people are primarily in dysfunction. So this obscures the kind of coverage that would highlight the capacity that Black people have to address the issues and challenges in our community. They're in fact successful interventions that are happening as it relates to the conditions in our community that unfortunately don't get the same kind of coverage. So what's important then about Fox 45 is that its coverage is tied directly to a particular agenda in our local political landscape, right? So again, there's the general critique of media, but one of the things that we want people to leave with today is an understanding that there is something particularly political, right? Particularly about the local political landscape that Fox 45 is engaged in, that's important for us to change. So that's going to take a couple of forms. So first, I'm going to do an analysis of some of the recent policy landscape. So it took an uprising in 2015. I mentioned the Department of Justice report. I mentioned a variety of different things that have happened since the uprising in terms of reports that identify the ways that law enforcement was engaged in violence against our community, and that kind of spurred criminal justice reform. Many organizations, including LBS and others, had to push the legislature to a more progressive stance on criminal justice. So that, precipitated the repeal of the Maryland Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. So that was something, Maryland was the first state to institute a police officer's Bill of Rights that then was copied around the United States. They gave law enforcement power above and beyond their constitutional rights and insulated them from accountability. So you had the repeal of that in 2021. You had Anton's Law, a change to the Maryland Public Information Act. Prior to the passage of this law, the investigatory records of law enforcement were prohibited from public disclosure, right? That was something that was passed in 2021, right? A use of force standard, right? That essentially created a standard for which law enforcement had to be held accountable in terms of the use of force. That happened in 2021. The passage of the Child Interrogation Protection Act, a law that required that if a police officer engages in a custodial interrogation of a young person, that a parent had to be notified, and that an attorney had to consult an attorney before talking to law enforcement. That was passed in 2022. The Juvenile Justice Reform Act, right, that sought to curtail the extent to which young people were absorbed into the criminal justice system. That passed in 2022. The legalization of recreational cannabis, right? That was something that law enforcement, had a challenge with. One of the things that we particularly worked on was making it so that law enforcement couldn't solely use odor as the basis for a stop and search, which was something that prosecutors and law enforcement fought back furiously against. And that actually passed on the last day of the 2023 Maryland General Assembly at 11:53 at night when the session ended at midnight. So what has happened is there was a time when prosecutors and law enforcement had a monopoly on the policy made in both committees in the Maryland General Assembly that dealt with criminal justice, the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. So there was time where they had monopolized it. Over the past several years, the way that they have narrated it is that Maryland has become a left-wing state, right? That it's become too progressive. In fact, there was the former chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, Bobby Zirkin, who represented the Pikesville, Owensville area of Baltimore County. He actually once referred to us and some of the organizations that we partner with as the criminal lobby, right? As advocates for criminals, right? And so it is that regime from which their power has been weakened over the past several years. So it's important to lay out that landscape and that framework. The reason for that is because what we're seeing law enforcement and prosecutors reacting to the loss of control and power that they have over those committees. So we have to see the coverage of Fox 45 over the past several years as an attempt by law enforcement, prosecutors, and those that share their worldview. We have to see Fox 45's coverage as a response, as an attempt to reclaim power that they are losing in the policymaking arena. So that's important in terms of thinking about the political landscape. So again, it's not just kind of these are things they're interested in, right? It is a particular political bent that they have. So when you think about the fact that Fox over the past 3 years has focused on high homicide rates, right? And what's interesting is non-fatal shootings, homicides are down in Baltimore City, right? You don't see the same level of coverage about the progress that has been made and how to build on that. So I would argue that the switch or the intentionality of talking about juvenile crime, which only makes up about 10% of the violent crime that happens, right? But has an outsized impact and impression in terms of the coverage of Fox 45. So that is a political decision that they are making. In other words, we should not be confused to believe that the coverage of juvenile violence and crime has to do with a genuine care for Black youth, right? It's important for us to be clear that the focus on that is a political choice that Fox 45 is making. What is worse is that Fox 45 coverage exploits the ways that Black people have justified attacks again in disregard for each other, right? There's a willingness to excuse the way that in many cases, Black middle class is largely abandoned or complicit. The impression of working class Black people talk about the 1994 crime bill. One of the things that does, Joe Biden and Bill Clinton are often blamed for that. But it's important to note that many Black elected officials went along with that, right? And I remember even during the 2016 election, Bobby Rush, who was a former member of the Black Panther Party, a member who serves in Congress representing Chicago, actually got on television ahead of the 2016 election, urging people to vote for Bill Clinton. But he was apologizing for the fact that he voted for the crime bill, right? So there were Black elected officials, right, who were a big part of why the crime bill passed, right? So one of the things that Fox 45 is taking advantage of is that dynamic. And many of us believe about our people what white society sees in us. And we feel more comfortable chastising other Black people for things that many of us did, or many of us that have relatives that did, as opposed to being committed to transforming the community. One of the things I want to emphasize is that, again, this isn't a denial of the fact that there are real challenges in the community. And part of what happens is that what Fox 45 has done is that it has framed the conversation in such a way where they want people to believe that what is on the table is whether or not young people should be held accountable for committing crimes. And that is not what is on the table, right? None of the folks that are challenging the criminal justice bill that's being before us, none of us that advocated for some of the reforms I mentioned before, are folks that believe that young people that commit heinous crimes should not be held accountable. There are laws existing on the books that allow law enforcement to arrest, to detain, to prosecute young people engaged in heinous crimes. So no one is advocating that young people should not be held accountable. But this is what Fox 45 has said is on the table. They're saying that the bill before us is a question of whether or not young people should be held accountable. There was even a Goucher report that was done where the way they framed the question was asked as to whether or not, in terms of dealing with juvenile justice policy, whether folks believe that the policy should be more about leniency for young people or accountability, right? And that is a false binary, right? That we believe that you should be held accountable for the things that they do. What is on the table is whether or not the opportunities for diversion should be shrunk, right? What we're looking for is maybe to deal with young people on an individualized basis, right? So that three teenagers, a 14-year-old and two 12-year-olds, the 12-year-old decides they want to steal a car. The 12-year-olds, we want to be able to deal with them differently, right? Maybe those 2-year-olds, those 12-year-olds that are in the car are folks that require a different kind of intervention, right? Than the 14-year-old that probably needs some more severe dealing, right? That what the bill does that's before us is shrink the opportunity to deal with each person differently. And again, I want to reiterate that there are ways in which interactions with the criminal justice system are life-altering. Those are the things that are rendered invisible. So what I want to do in closing, and then bring the panel up, is I want to actually read the Baltimore Banner released a story where when David Smith after the Baltimore Sun, there were some folks that took note, recorded some of the things that David Smith said during the conversation. I'm going to read some of the quotes of what he said to, because he bought the Baltimore Sun. David Smith, who owns Sinclair Broadcasting, Fox45, bought the Baltimore Sun. So I want to read some of the quotes of things that he said in this conversation with some reporters to give you a sense of the importance of understanding who he is, what Fox45 is, and its impact on the local political landscape. So the first quote, and he's talking about that he's being asked about how he wants to cover Baltimore. He says, "You can blame the family because you can say there's no family. We had a story last year of a woman who has 6 different kids by 3 different men. Nobody knows the kids' father. They're a product of Baltimore, and they're a product of the Baltimore City inner city lifestyle." Right. So this is what David Smith believes about Black people. So what kind of coverage should we expect from someone from whom that is their belief about people in Baltimore City? Right. That the only kind of coverage that can emerge from that is the kind of coverage that reinforces the belief of the inherent inferiority of Black people, and that Black people are primarily dysfunctional. Right. Second quote. So here he's talking about law enforcement and public safety. He says, "Yes, the police will categorically tell you behind closed doors because they're political animals like anyone else. The person you should be asking is the politician, which is, do you understand police don't want to do their job because of the laws that you created? Many of them are terrified because they saw what happened to the police officers who Maryland Mosby wanted to prosecute, that they were all charged. They ruined those people's lives." So he's expressing a sympathy with law enforcement. So those laws that I mentioned before, that the legislature was moving in the direction of police accountability, he's saying law enforcement, they're scared to do their jobs now, right? So they're scared to do their jobs because now there's a mechanism for the people they police to hold them accountable, right? So he's expressing sympathy for the fact that they're not able to run roughshod to the same level that they were before, right? And expressing more sympathy for the officers charged with killing Freddie Gray as opposed to Freddie Gray. To me, that speaks to his larger value of people like Freddie Gray, working class Black people that don't have access to resources or platform, for whom the violence against them is rendered invisible. Last quote. This piece is around, to me, this ties directly the impact of his ownership of Fox45 and the Baltimore Sun to the larger political landscape. He says, and now he's talking about the nature of the kind of coverage that he wants his reporters to do. He says, I'll give you an example. We've done polls on Ferguson and Adrian Jones, very simple polls. Now, Bill Ferguson and Adrian Jones last year said that juvenile justice, whatever the legal system is, works the way it should. When 24 district attorneys got on television and said that it's bullshit, it was a problem. When we started focusing on Bill Ferguson and Adrian Jones, you know what they did? They started moving away from their position. Adrian Jones, literally, I know this because you're so plugged into what goes on in Annapolis and the governor's office. We don't really find out. When I think it was Mackenzie Frost was walking towards Adrian Jones, she was almost running to her car to get away from her. The story was so scary to her. You know what she did within an hour? She said, "We have to do something now. We have to do something now because I don't want to be bothered by these people." So this demonstrates the fact that David Smith is clear about using the media machines that he's been able to amass for his own political purposes and worldview. So I want to end with that because, again, there's a generalized criticism of media that's important for us to understand in the way that it impacts Black people. But Fox45 and Sinclair Broadcasting has a impact on the local political landscape that advances policies that criminalize young people that don't have the interests of Black people at heart. So challenging Fox45 and Sinclair Broadcasting is important politically, right? So there's a generalized critique of media, but there's a particular political importance of challenging Fox45 and Sinclair Broadcasting. So that's a big part of why LBS has made the determination that it's important for us to speak out and challenge Fox45 because unchecked, they're able to project an outsized influence over the legislature. There's certain policies that weren't on the table last session that folks are unwilling to even put on the table. Like one of the things that, and Senator Carter has been a champion of this for years, is stopping the automatic charge of adults, right? That making it so that people are exposed to the juvenile justice system, and that if it requires them to go to the adult system, they can waive that. But what's happening is that because of these criminalized notions of Black youth, right, that this policy is off the table for consideration, right? Because the legislative environment has been scared out of the kind of advocacy that would benefit. And so it's really important to connect both the perspective of Sinclair, the perspective of David, and the political dynamics here in Baltimore. So what I'll do is transition to our panel. So some of our panelists can start coming up.
And also, if you're in the back, there's some seats. Raise your hand, you have an empty seat next to you, so folks in the back can sit down. So feel free to come on up.
So while they're getting set up, what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do once the panelists get settled is going to ask them to react to the presentation. Each of them are going to react to the presentation. Then I'm going to ask specific questions here at particular panelists. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if Senator Carter has somewhere to be soon, so I'm going to ask her to go first.
No. Which representative? Miss
She was here. I don't need to be here.
Thank you, Bob.
So we're gonna pass the mic. I just want to make sure the people on the live stream can hear it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with asking the panelists to just react to the presentation. So we'll start here and go down the line.
Peace and blessings, Sadiq Ali, representing today Baltimore as ecosystem building. First and foremost, Davon, you and I, we talk very, very often about many of the things that you just shared out in your presentation. Very, very well done. The thing that comes to mind to me, though, is this phenomenon of having the opportunity to arm other Black folks with this language and this paradigm and allowing our worldview to permeate each other. Last year, one of the favorite books that I read was, to date, the most comprehensive biography of Malcolm X, The Dead Are Alive by Les Payne. It was finished posthumously by his daughter, Tamara Payne. Highly, highly recommend. But one of the quotes that stood out to me in the book was Malcolm X's paradigm around the fact that other insidious impact that this sort of coverage has from Black person to Black person is this idea that we start to believe these images as well about ourselves. And one thing that Malcolm X was clear in his work during his time with the NOI and Post was this idea that Black folks, we also have to change our minds about each other. Because just as we saw with the example of Bobby Rush with the crime bill, there are lots of folks that think that we deserve to have the book thrown at us as well. So what I appreciate most about publications like Fear of a Black Planet and before it, When Baltimore Wakes, also must reading from the LBS team, is this idea that we have to begin to go through the process of changing our paradigm of each other as Black folks and having this language at the ready. So that way, the next time a camera's in front of us, we are armed and ready to fight back against a bunch of this poison that we see on a day-to-day basis. So I share.
Good morning. Nadine Finnegan-Carr, Executive Director of the University of Maryland Center for Violence Prevention. And what really struck me, similarly to what you were speaking about as Dave was talking, was the internalized white supremacy that exists when we begin to feel that what people are saying about us is true. Okay, when you know, as was mentioned, when our politicians, when the people who are supposed to represent us believe that we are also inherently inferior, just like the other, that's where it becomes problematic. And that is where bills such as the one that is being proposed get legs from people who look like us and who want to push that forward as well. That is something that we as a whole need to recognize and understand that in most cases, the number of youth that they are referring to is not that many. It is not that many at all. When you think about the fact that there are 31 million youth in the juvenile justice system across this country, okay? 31 million. And of that 31 million, only about 3 to 4 million end up in some sort of juvenile justice system, taken out of their homes, placed in a facility. And the majority of those youth are the ones that look like us. That means about 27 million youth that are engaging in some sort of criminality receive the types of responses that we are asking for our own children. And that's what really gets me, is the fact that instead of seeing it as a systematic problem, what we're doing by internalizing is seeing it as, well, those kids are wrong. They shouldn't have committed crimes, but the other 27 million did as well. And the other 27 million tend to not look like us. So why do they deserve services and interventions and wrap around and love, and our kids don't? So that's really what, you know, that inherent inferiority and us taking it on, we've got to drop it. And we've got to focus on what is it that our youth really need to succeed.
Good afternoon, family. Thank you for being here. Davon, there's a lot I could say in response to much of your presentation, but I'll hold it. I'll just start with Bobby Rush wasn't the only one who was responsible for the crime. Some of our people right here that represent us now were responsible for that. They have not apologized. You know, we are living in a time, and my brother right here talked about Malcolm X, and every day I remind myself of Malcolm X's quote that the media is the most powerful entity on earth. It controls the minds of the masses, and it can have people believing the innocent are guilty and the guilty are innocent. That is our experience right now in Baltimore with Fox Baltimore, and it will be only exacerbated by David Smith's now ownership of the Baltimore Sun. Look, I thought we had problems before. This is bad. And what I've observed is that our other media outlets are not doing any type of a strong job kind of providing counter coverage or counterbalance. And so we're in a time where Fox is relatively dominating the entire media here and controlling the minds of the masses. I've been a recipient of that, which I'm sure I'll get into a little bit later. But I want to talk, because I'm like about the legislature, which I serve in. So I literally serve in an institution and a body where I experience every day an environment that where because a white man says something, there is more credibility attached to it than my saying the same thing. Notwithstanding the fact that I've been practicing law for 30 years, notwithstanding the fact that I represent more children in the juvenile system and adult system, criminal system, than anybody else in the body. I don't even know if anyone else has represented anyone. That experience is largely disregarded because a couple of state's attorneys and a couple of police heads went on media to Fox multiple times over the last year and said that because of the law we passed, they can't do anything to hold juveniles accountable. Missing from that dialogue that you've never heard reported on Fox, or I don't think in any media, is this stat, this actual fact that across Maryland, 64% of violent crime reported to police goes unsolved. 64%. There's no effort to deal with that number, to address the failings of law enforcement and why they are so inept at resolving crimes that are reported to them. Of course, we 7, 8 years into a consent decree, and 8 years after Freddie Gray, and right here, this is such a glaring example. Now, when I say this, I'm not casting aspersions on this individual. It's more about the way that some people like to call it playing in our face, but they're abusing us in our face. Alicia White was one of the officers charged in Freddie Gray. So whether we believe she was culpable or not culpable, she has now been made the head of the Baltimore Police Integrity Unit. That is simply amazing. So that is an example of, I think, that the media is important. There has been no significant coverage of something like that people ought to know. And it is, I think, there's a reliance on the fact that we've moved many years away from post-Freddie Gray uprisings, post-Freddie Gray reform, and frankly, the body that I'm in 2021, we passed police reforms, including repealing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, and little by little, there are members that are trying to roll it back, and they're being successful. There were bills before our committee, and that was the Judicial Proceedings Committee. This last week, there were 3 in a row that sought to chip away at changes in police reform. And when I spoke to the leadership of my body, they said, "Oh, well, we like 2 of them." Okay? So this is where we are, people. We're not in a good place. And it's more important than ever that people pay attention to what goes on in Annapolis. You absolutely cannot rely on the news to adequately report it. You're going to have to find somebody that you're affiliated with or in your organization or in your group that you hang with to plug in to those links and watch our hearings and watch our voting sessions. That's the only way that you're going to get to the truth. So I'll save more to talk about, but I guess that I just want to leave us with this is a time where we are literally back in the 1960s, where all of the media we just had to consider as Black people was just going to be racist. And we had to find other ways to communicate with each other and spread the word in alternative media. And we actually need to engage in media training so that we're able to counter some of those. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tim Monaldo. I'm here with the Black Women's and Men's Exchange. I'm the chief advisor there. And of course, Yvonne's presentation was illuminating, brilliant, and broke down things that we need to talk about. I tend to think that we look at the world through a filter. And I'm going to talk about the filter. The sister said earlier that Fox does what it does, which is perpetually putting out white supremacy, mythological, anti-Black. And she said, and the other press does not counter it. Well, white supremacy doesn't counter white supremacy. It doesn't go, oh, it just, I mean, what happens is Fox, this is one of the white supremacy setups, one of the filters. Fox are the bad guys, and the rest of them are nice, but they're not. There's a large and very relentless intentionality on interrupting Black common sense in the Black psyche. And there's all kinds of white people who want to play guitar and stuff who are involved. For example, in terms of agenda, Microsoft owns a huge media conglomerate. The owns Amazon, Prime Video. All of them have bought empires because they are participants in the filter that keeps us questioning about the value. But one thing I want to say before I go any further is that, and I think LBS is an example of this, the power for change is in our hands. It don't gotta be like this. So no matter how heavy what I'm gonna say is, understand that dormant at all times is the possibility of Black power that can be behavioralized by us, that we just put it in the motion like LBS does. So Don't go into no gloom and what's the word? Doom. Thank you. Don't go into that when we talk about how hard things are, because we can walk past it. I want to reiterate that. Oh, yes, it's constantly walking past it and affecting policy and the way the world turns so they can finish in their colleagues. So I want to keep that in your mind, because some of us are so brainwashed we can't even recognize progress. And we know when there's progress that's going on. Let me give you an example of why. Ooh, I get emotional. Except some of this stuff almost essential. This is part of the consequence of the unresolved, unrecognized filter. And I'm going to say this before I get into it, that caring about Black people is a 24/7 occupation. Not just on Saturday, because believe it or not, white supremacy methodology is war on your ass 24/7. That's why I want to address this perspective about Fox and the press and the other press counter it. They're not going to counter it because they're relentlessly interested in the outcomes that David Smith is also interested in, that Devon broke down. But I want us to look at our inadvertent participation behaviorally and culturally in the problem. Not because we're genetically designed to do this, but it's hard to speak Swahili in an English-speaking country. Am I making sense? That's how you know it's English. So sometimes we use words like decisions, rights, and it's not a decision that we've embraced. We speak English. And built in English itself is anti-Black. Dark days, devil's ever heard it. The N-word, which we've made into poetry, which is like putting shit on M&Ms. Anyway, it's a metaphor. Anyway, during the Dylan Roof massacre, I happened to be traveling across the country, speaking at mental health conferences. There was a system of them across the country where Black mental health professionals were getting together in conference to talk about what we're going to do about Black people's mental health. Anyway, I was an invited speaker, keynote speaker at this event, and I asked the parents, there was about 1,000 people there, predominantly Black, few white. And I asked the audience, I said, Black Spice. Anyway, I asked the audience, I said, can I ask your children a question? Now, I had been talking to them for at least 20 minutes, so they kind of trusted me a little bit. It was like out of the blue. I said, can I ask your children a question? And if you like the question, you can shut it down and say, that's unacceptable. Please stop. And I will stop the question yet, but I'm not going to ask you first. Can I ask your children a question? And they said yes. And they were like, maybe 100 babies there. Babies meaning people that are 17 and younger, my age, 30 in some cases. But anyway, I said, do you know who Dylan Roof is to the children? And it was, and they were babies there who were like 4 and 3, who knew who Dylan Roof was. I said, what did you do, young man? Who's a young man? He killed those people. Who did he kill? And he had a hard time saying that he killed Black people. That hurt his feelings, just to articulate that. So to make a long story shorter, I asked the children, I said, and these are mental health professionals, some of them PhD level, who were predominant audiences. I said, babies, how many of you did your parents take you aside and ask you how you feel about that? And did it impact you or make you feel any kind of way? Raise your hand if your parent actually provided space for you to engage the impact of that issue on you. Guess how many parents in a mental health event how many children raised their hand if their parent had engaged them? Basically none. And my point of telling that story, and I have other similar stories in terms of what happens when there's a everyone was murdered, when Freddie was murdered. We are so unconsciously trained to be safety nets against white engagement around what we do that we have really silenced the opportunity, unlike LBS, the opportunity to directly confront what they do. You know what I'm saying? I'm about to close, but I want to make you understand that those parents who worked in the mental health business did not have the insight to understand how to de-traumatize their children after a large-scale trauma event that they saw. And here's the picture of the children who started to cry, who started to tear. There was hardly any white kids there, boys, because they are almost never given permission to speak about how they feel, or to say they even have, or even say that this hurts mommy, seeing that Dylan Ruth did that, that's terrible. They don't get to say that. Be a man. And I understand that because you've been castrated for 200 years. You want to kind of make up for lost penises, or whatever you want to say. Y'all laughing, but I'm serious. Trying to make up for stuff that being this male, hyper dramatic performance to make up for an assault that you weren't allowed to talk about. So we want to hear something other than white David Smith and white bullcrap. We also have to listen to ourselves and how we operate with our children and the kind of space we give to actually decompress in the midst of this white supremacist, psychotic, pathological insanity that's being called proper behavior by David Smith, who owns the media, along with whatever. All these people, they all, because they want to win. At the end of this, they want to win at all costs. We gotta want to win at all costs too, including how we behave in each other's presence, including how we treat each other. I was at the Target store. I confronted her with love when this black was mad at a little boy for taking too long. Get your black ass over if I beat the black off. Now, who've heard that before? We can't do that. We can't do that because they grow up to become the confused senator in Chicago that he referenced, Bobby Rush, who's schizophrenic. Well, it's hard not to be schizophrenic. It's hard. It's possible. I ain't schizophrenic at all. I'm clear. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's clear in this room. We can be clear, but we have to recognize the filter and understand that we are under attack and we observe it. It's not right and we got to resist.
All right, so what I'm going to do is going to ask questions to that particular panelist. I'm going to start with Senator Carter. You actually talked about some of this, the political impact of Fox45’s coverage. If you can combine that with some conversation around the juvenile justice bill, the things that are wrong with it, so that people have a real story, a real sense of what's at stake.
Thank you so much. I think that I'm hoping too that as we talk about the issues going on right here in Maryland and in Baltimore City, we should focus specifically and directly on actual people who are responsible for the policies. If you live in Maryland, I would hope that you would know and have a way to communicate with your specific senator and delegates, because right now we are in legislative session and everything is on the line. Everything is on the line this session. If we roll back anything, it is a step in reversing the minuscule progress that we've made. And that minuscule progress is that, I guess in 2019, 2020, I became part of a council, a juvenile reform council that was tasked with figuring out how to fix Maryland's problems in dealing with children in our juvenile and criminal justice systems. We were ranked 50, but at very last of all 50 states for violating human rights of children in our criminal and juvenile justice systems. Maryland sent and still continues to send more children to adult court and prison for longer sentences than any other state in the country. Maryland continues to charge automatically and send more children to adult court and prison for longer sentences than any other state in the country. So you don't need to go looking at Mississippi or Alabama or Texas. You need to look right here at home. And who's responsible for that? We are, the legislative body, the senators and the delegates. We create these laws. And so the Juvenile Reform Act, which was passed in 2022, did 4 basic things. Davon touched on a little bit of it, but basically it sought to allow for a diversion for more children so that if we can get children and prevent them before they go into the adversarial or detention system or prison system or secure facility system, they call it in juvenile, then we can possibly rehabilitate or meet their needs or give them the treatment that they might need and services so that we can divert them from ever needing to be in any of those processes or facilities. All of the data shows that children are more likely to be worse after they're in the system than before. So if we can get them before and not get them in there and meet their needs, then we can divert it, which is not only a benefit to the children, to the families and the communities, it is a benefit to the public safety. Okay, so people don't talk about the fact that fixing the problem before it gets worse is actually a public safety benefit. Not only a tax-based benefit, because the more people that we have not a burden on the system but contributing to the system is better for all of us. So another part of the bill would decrease juvenile court jurisdiction, because here's something that is never talked about in the media. There aren't very many children under the age of 13 that were charged or prosecuted prior to the Juvenile Reform Act. It was the numbers were very small. There were more charged than prosecuted for the reason that just about 80% of children under the age of 13, 12 and under, charged with a crime or what would be a crime in adult court, are determined to be incompetent to stand trial. Meaning, before the Juvenile Reform Act that you hear is so problematic, these children 12 and under were not being prosecuted anyway because they weren't competent to stand trial. So what the Juvenile Reform Act seeks to do is to say 12 and under, if you're 9 and under, you will never be charged. You will not be charged with anything if you're 9 and under. But if you're 10 to 12, middle school age, and you commit an act that is not a non-violent felony, then we're going to try to divert you and put you into services and treatment and programs so that you don't have to escalate in any type of criminal behavior. That's all the bill does. But if you listen to the media, how many people that just heard what I said but have listened to the media tell you something different than that? The media tells you that because of the law we passed, children can't be held accountable. Because of the law we passed, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds that commit violent acts can't be held accountable. They can't be charged. They can't be prosecuted. That's not the law. Anybody that's 13 and over can be charged absolutely with anything. Anybody 10 and over can be charged with violent crimes. Carjacking, that everybody likes to talk about so much as a horrible violent crime, is actually chargeable. So, and here's the thing though. Here's the thing. Even though a 10-year-old can absolutely be charged with a carjacking, do you have any idea how many 10-year-olds committed a carjacking in the last year? 2 years, 5 years? None that we know of. The data shows none. Maybe 11 and 12-year-olds are more apt to have been participants in something, but it's about 0.3% for that age group in violent crimes. And so the issue is, you've heard that these 11-year-olds, really quickly, I'm gonna talk about a real quick story because this story has been played over and over and over. And it's been repeated by law enforcement and prosecutors. There was a story that some 11-year-old stole 17 cars, but because of the law we passed, nothing could be done. First of all, anybody that would not question law enforcement, that would have the same 11-year-old that they would constantly find stealing cars and do nothing with but return home, you need to ask the question, what is wrong with him or her, the law enforcement officer? Because there's a myriad of different things that can happen short of even charging, okay? But if this kid was actually 11 and charging, there was a lot of things that should have and could have been done. But in this particular story, they went to a mother, alleged mother. We don't know it was the mother. Fox told us it was the mother. We don't know who that person was because they didn't show the face. They didn't show the face and they didn't say the name. But alleged mother who said, well, the law, I think she might have even said my name directly. Jill Carter's law, which I'll get to that in a second. Because of her law, we can't do nothing with my kid. Well, that was a whole plan. And the information that I have been told, and I'm not spreading this because I don't know it to be fact, but, is that particular thing was a complete sham. And that particular person that was contending to be the mother that couldn't do anything was actually, a leader of that child getting into all that trouble. So it was a fake story. It was fake news. But there's something called child in need of supervision that many law enforcement officers and many prosecutors apparently did not know existed until recently. They never used it, but the goal is to get them to use it more. Any mother, any teacher, any parent, any law enforcement officer, any person can file a child in need of supervision petition for a child that you just can't take control of. You can't get the child to go to school. The child doesn't listen. The child doesn't do anything they're supposed to do. You can do that, and the child can be evaluated and assessed, and there can be interventions there. And that's the goal for these children that simply won't do what they're supposed to do, and the parents can't do anything to get them to conform to what society expects of them. But that's an example of an exaggerated lie that many people have come to believe, and many people have repeated, that these 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds are just absolutely out of control. Well, the numbers show they're absolutely not that many of them doing that much. But even when they were, before the law, the new law, they were not being prosecuted. But here's the difference. Under the new law, the Juvenile Reform Act, the processes are supposed to be up for certified diversion programs and SINS programs that can actually meet and address their needs. Prior to the law, nothing was done at all. So they're waiting to be charged. They're charged. Nothing is done. No programs, no services. Then they're charged, and then there's a competency petition filed. They're found incompetent, and guess what? Nothing is done. So the new law actually is more beneficial than prior to the law if people would just follow it. And so I just got to say that right now, the bill that the leadership of both houses, the Senate President, the House Speaker, the leader of my committee, and the House Judiciary Committee, in fact, the bill, the reversal bill has already passed out of the House Judiciary Committee. We're in real trouble because the law that they're attempting to pass is not a response to data. It's a response to lies that have been perpetuated in the media, and there's been no adequate response to. Not just no adequate response from the other white media, there's been no pushback from our community, really. Not a strong pushback from us. The Afro hasn't pushed back. There hasn't been any pushback. And I think it's because of much of what Davon said that we kind of I remember really quick, and I'm going to end here. I remember when I was a kid, and it was much less prevalent than now, when there would be a report of a crime on the news, and my entire family would sit paralyzed, waiting, hoping, and praying, please don't let him be black. Please don't let him be black. Because we knew that would just further perpetuate the stereotypes of our inherent criminality, right? Well, I feel we're still doing the same as a community. Because they're talking about these children, and I'll end here. If we, adults, lawmakers, judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers, parents, teachers, schools, we ain't talking about the 46% chronic truancy in schools in Maryland, but if we can't figure out how to handle a 10-year-old short of caging them, there's more wrong with us than them.
All right, next I'm going to go to Dr. Carr. And if you can talk about, we've talked about the images in the media, the impact that it's had. What is your sense of the impact that these images and representations have when it comes to violence prevention interventions and the kinds of things that are championed in that arena?
So right now, the only violence prevention intervention that Sinclair Broadcasting would have us believe works is further incarceration, which couldn't be further from the truth. Senator Carter spoke of the children in need of assistance, children in need of supervision, pieces of what should be happening for violent crimes. It should be happening, period. Okay? And if officers, if prosecutors don't know this exists, they're lying to us. Going back to that, they're playing in our face, they're abusing in our face statement, because that is the law that they use. This is tell you how they know it exists. That's the law that they use when they take children away from their parents for things like not feeding them. And I don't mean not feeding them because you're withholding food. I mean because you don't have the money to buy food and your child is coming to school hungry more than they think is allowable. That's the same law that they use. That's the same law that is when they call social services, that is what is filed, is a children in need of assistance, a children in need of supervision. That's what's filed in the courts to allow them to remove children. So to say that they don't know about it is truly a lie. If you can use it to actually cause parents harm, then why can't you use it to help? The other thing that I realize is when we think about interventions, if we're going to leave the incarceration out of it and we want to think about interventions, I really want to look at you. How many of you work with, volunteer with, are a part of some sort of program to support youth in Baltimore City? Okay? All right. How many of you, those are nonprofits? Okay. How many of you are struggling to find funding to support these programs that would actually help youth? Many of us, because I'm seeing some of these faces, many of us are employing evidence-based, evidence-informed programs because the powers that be say in order to be funded, you have to prove that you work. So you go through all of these hoops, and you're still fighting to get the funding to support these youth. Now, I represent the University of Maryland. I'm at the Center for Violence Prevention there. So I understand the position in which I speak, right? I understand that being a part of a university system, I am part of the nonprofit industrial complex. But I also know I don't resemble most of the people that are a part of the nonprofit industrial complex that handle the money. And what typically happens is that the interventions that the media would say works are the interventions that are put forward by people that do not look like us. In fact, they are the interventions that feed into the white savior complex. Okay, so if we think about those interventions, we think about interventions where people come in and tell us what we need. When they come in and tell us that we're doing it wrong, when they come in and they tell us, you know, we go to workshops about violence prevention and people tell us what violence is and what the social determinants of health are when we are living it every day. Those are the interventions that Fox, Sinclair would have us believe are the only interventions outside of incarceration. So if we think about what the media is showing us, right? So when you think about the fact that on all of these media outlets, they always have this like feel-good story of the week. And that feel-good story of the week typically involves someone who has rescued or saved, all of these words that I hate. I worked in human trafficking for years. And when people tell me that they rescue someone, I automatically am like, you can't rescue anyone who does not want to get out. That is not a rescue. That is assistance. But the feel-good stories tend to show where they rescue us, where they save us, and where that person, and no offense, because there are allies. I'm not saying that there are no allies, but typically the person they showcase is a person who has received money on top of money on top of money to work with 50 kids at the most. They're talking about programs that have funding from multiple foundations and federal, and have large infrastructure. And like I said, are serving 50, 100 kids, when many of us are serving thousands of kids on a shoestring budget. Sometimes not even the shoestrings. So when we think about the images of prevention and intervention that we see in the media, we have to start seeing ourselves. And we have to start telling our own stories. And we have to show that those stories are not the exception to the rule, they are the rule. It is not Black exceptionalism. And it's not necessarily Black excellence. It's Black love. It's our culture. It's what we do. We want to help each other. And as the brother said, you know, speaking Swahili when we're meant to speak English, what we are doing is doing what comes naturally for us because we're building community, regardless of whether or not people want to see that. And sometimes that's hard because we're doing it up against further laws that are making it harder for us to do our jobs. Because in rolling back some of these things, it also rolls back some of the money and the allowed things that you are able to do with your organization to support youth. And I too have a story that's related to, if a child comes to your program, if a young person comes to your program and needs help and needs support, but stops coming for a little while, and we know life gets in the way. Younger siblings, for whatever reason, it might have nothing to do with a criminal activity, but that youth might not come for a couple of days, a couple of weeks. What we tend to do is what? Try to find out what's going on. And what I'm seeing in some of these programs that are well-funded is that if a youth, a young person, a young adult stops coming and they've engaged even a light touch in the juvenile justice system, they call their parole officers. They turn them in and say, well, they're not coming anymore. So they're giving up on them in ways that we don't typically do. What we've got to do when we push back is we've got to mobilize everyone that we've helped. We've got to make sure that people go out and provide written testimony, provide comment. And I know it's hard. There are 13 to 15% of us in this state. There are roughly 13 to 15% of people who want us to fail. The people in the middle are the indifferents. There are enough of us to push back on those who want to push us down. So if we want our interventions to succeed, we've got to step up and push back. We've got to mobilize, and we've got to continue with the interventions that you all are doing that we know are working, regardless of what the media would have us believe.
So to extend on that, Sadiq, one of the projects that Sadiq and I work on together is the Baltimore Rites of Passage Initiative. And Sadiq will talk more about African Center Rites of Passage. Sadiq, if you could talk about the impact that these narratives have on youth, particularly thinking about our work in terms of rites of passage, dealing with the way that identity formation and culture as a kind of anchor for that is important in helping young people navigate the societal propaganda I talked about in the beginning. Can you talk a little bit more in depth about how these narratives impact young people and some of the interventions and how those interventions are important in pushing back against those narratives?
Y'all make some noise for these folks though, y'all. Make some noise for LDS as well for bringing us all together, man, in this conversation. Very, very much needed. So building upon a bunch of the really like poignant pieces that Dr. Carr lifted up on this idea of narratives, and it kind of goes back again to Davon's opening salvo around the poison that these entities like Sinclair and Fox45 itself, but it does a couple different things when we talk about from the perspective of young folks, especially young Black youth here in the cities, right? This idea of dehumanizing self, right? So that is the, again, constant insidious chipping away at self-esteem and confidence, but it also dehumanizes others that look like me. And then thirdly, I think it strips away all aspects of any assets from inside the community. Something that me and Davon and other folks in this room talk about often is this idea that success oftentimes is touted and the Black community is getting as far the hell away from your community as possible when you make it, which is a poisonous mindset to have, which means essentially, I don't think there is anything of value from where I come from other than constant, consistent trauma, which we know nothing could be further from the truth, because without assets, we would not have made it to this point. When this entire system for, again, 400 years of enslavement, 100 years of lynchings, Jim Crow sanctioned terror from the state, there's no way we make it here without assets as Black folks. But when we see this constant barrage of images, et cetera, it allows Black youth, especially our young brothers, to not see myself in this other young man, which allows me then the ability to do anything to them because I don't see myself in them. And if I do, I hate what I see. This is again, the insidious nature. This is the impact, some of the impact that we see some of these narratives from the media play out. It also, I would say, runs counter to, again, one of our ancient South African paradigms that many in this room are familiar with, the concept of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is one of Desmond Tutu's, sort of favorite reference points. Nelson Mandela has spoken about it a bunch. The age-old paradigm, which is completely in line with sort of African cosmology, this idea that I am because we are. I am because we are, and that, that there's a deeper element of it and that is being myself through others. Being myself through others. And again, when I chip away, when I think, and I show that there's no value, then again, it allows me to do whatever, whenever, however. So, this idea of Ubuntu, I think, again, we have to recapture that. Again, starting with us as a community, I echo many of the sentiments that Dr. Manago threw out there, which is, again, we have so much power, right? And again, we have to start sort of rejiggering how we deal with each other. So in terms of just like, how do we push back, right? Again, not all doom and gloom, but there's a bunch of things that we can do to push back, again, starting with Black folks, right? And, from a programming perspective, there's always like sort of three things that most recently we're always talking about should be included. And again, many of the practitioners in this room, some of whom I know, I think do a great job of it. The best programs in Baltimore, they start with ensuring that we infuse culture in all programming, first and foremost, before we get to the sort of clinical X's and O's, which again sort of reinforces all programs should first and foremost be designed to fix something, right? You are not good in math, so first come to the after-school math program. We're going to fix you up in math. But there's no relationship. There's no culture. There's no relevance. And as the old saying, right? rules without relationship breeds rebellion. So of course we see rebellion inside our educational institutions because there's no relationship and there's no culture. Amazing psychologist, champion of Black folks, Dr. Naeem Akbar, he has one of my favorite quotes on culture. And again, I'll paraphrase. But the essence of culture, Dr. Akbar tells us, is that any people whose culture, first and foremost, doesn't instill a sense of pride is a failure as a culture. And right now, part of the work that we have to do in community and via youth programming is we got to reestablish pride in what it means to be a Black person. And that work starts with us. So again, programs that infuse culture are critical in rebuilding the self-esteem that is chipped away at day in and day out, not only through the media, but through school and through community and through policing, and the list goes on and on and on. So culture. The other thing that I would say is one of the elements that we got to ensure is central in programming, again, especially designed to build up confidence of Black youth, is the element of spirituality, right? The element, and I didn't say religion. I didn't say religion. I said spirituality. That is a connection to a higher source or force that helps reinforce. It helps buoy. It helps strengthen that young person to let them know that they have a purpose in here. They have a purpose on this planet. They were imbued with, they were breathed into it when they came into existence on this planet. And oftentimes, again, our programs are very cold. They're very clinical. We don't talk about spirituality. We don't talk about God, right? When that is oftentimes some of what's missing as we rebuild the self-esteem of our young people. So culture, in establishing that sense of pride, infusing spirituality into programming. And then the last element is a connection back to community. If our programs don't, emphasize a connection back to community, and again, intentionally look for the assets inside community, which includes family as well. Because a lot of times, one of the things we also don't talk about is that in programs, just as is the case in some schools, you got teachers bad-mouthing the parents and the family to the students. Right. So of course the student's gonna go back home with an attitude. He's gonna buck all the authority because the teacher at the school, who he might have grown or she might have grown to have a bit of respect for or rapport with, is now telling like, man, your family's actually holding you back. It actually ain't no good. Essentially your community ain't shit, is what she or he is saying in so many words. So our programming has to fight back and ensure that there is a tangible, hands-on connection back to community. And that's through volunteering. That's through, again, just lifting up all the different assets in community. And the last thing that I'll reference, and sort of that rebuilding of self, is one of my other favorite books is from Dr. Joy DeGruy. Some of y'all are familiar with post-traumatic slavery syndrome. Powerful, powerful reading that, again, talks about all of the different elements and again, gives us context for why we externalize, right? A lot of what we see. But in the book, she talks about a tool called the Do You Know scale. The Do You Know scale, which is 21 questions that anybody can infuse. We've actually started doing the questions with our kids at home, but you can infuse and program. And these questions are designed to build the intergenerational self of the young person, which is to show them that when they show up in spaces, they're not showing up alone. You got thousands of years worth of ancestors behind you, pushing you forward, on whose shoulders you stand. That's a powerful concept versus you just showing up. It's just Jamal and I'm by myself. He by himself. Like, that's crazy and so far from the truth. Last thing I'll note is a little bit of details about the initiative that we are working on. We're about almost 2 years in to the Baltimore Rites of Passage initiative. It was an idea that was birthed through lots of conversations between myself and Davon and our big brothers in the movement, the African Center Rites of Passage movement here in Baltimore. Baltimore has been one of the most fertile grounds in the entire country for the practicing and the sort of operationalizing of African Center rites. We got together with those leaders, those elders, and said, hey, let's work to build out an African-centered rites of passage ecosystem here in Baltimore, building upon those years of experience. We wrote a grant and ended up receiving funding, as a matter of fact, right? This is one of the good stories. We actually received funding from the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund in order to build out this ecosystem, which again, shout out to LBS and Davon and the team. They were integral in getting BCYF off the ground and infusing it with a paradigm that was designed to fund community-based interventions, not those, again, that are clinical and just sort of pulled off the shelf in a one-size-fits-all fashion. But the Baltimore Rites of Passage Initiative is designed first and foremost to train Black men, right? Because there are plenty of which are always raising their hands, answering the call to how they can do more. We're currently concluding a process of taking a group of 16 Black men through a rites of passage process. We're then training them on how to execute African-centered rites of passage in community. We'll be launching our first youth line for youth rights this summer, and then continuing every other year training a new line of Black men on this process. And our goal is to build an army of men in this city that are getting their hands in the work, that are serious about infusing culture, and especially the African-centered elements of culture into programming, building up folks, young Black men, so that way we're not ashamed of who we are, because there's tremendous power we know in that identity. And the last thing I'll say is that everyone in this room is actually invited on, mark this date down, y'all, Saturday, April the 13th, over at the Baltimore Unity Hall. We are having what is called a rites of reincorporation, where we're actually going to be welcoming this group of 16 Black men who have gone through this process back into community. There's going to be a big celebration. There's going to be lots of demonstrations. There's going to be food, but you got to make sure that you RSVP there, and that will be the kickoff to our youth rights process as well. So there's a link floating around. Anybody who's interested in the link is bit.ly, right? So bit.ly/BROPI, BROPI, closing. We're going to email the link out. I was so close. I was so close, y'all. All right, with that, I will yield. Appreciate y'all.
So we're gonna have Dr. Cleo close us out before we do Q&A. And so in some ways, the question I have, you've already kind of addressed. I'll ask you to just go deeper as it relates to the impact that media has on the way that we treat each other. Because I think that's something that's a repeated theme that folks have said. Before I pass the mic to Cleo, in terms of the Q&A, because we're going to be tight for time, is that folks who have questions, I ask you to stand up to ask your question. I'll repeat it to the folks who are on the panel to answer the question. So it has to be a question. So I just wanted to say that. So Cleo's going to give his response, then we're going to go to Q&A.
I'll preface my comments with there's exceptions to everything. There's exceptions to, some people will say, for example, not all white people are bad. I don't need a calculator, but I keep hearing that. But the point is that there's exceptions. There's good people and good human beings in all walks of life, because some of us know that race is a construct. It's just skin deep, and somebody made up some BS fantasy, evil fantasy that we're still tripping off of. But we're all human beings, and we all have capability of wonderful things, regardless of this stuff. But this stuff is important. Melanin is important, so I'm going to be dismissive of melanin and act like it's just some stuff. There are different types of human beings that respond to the world seasonally and locationally based on who they are. But I preface my comments with that because I have to reiterate something. I smile when I think about what we've done as a people. The brother talked about the negative expectations or the negative assumptions that we make about each other. But we are, some of us know this, once upon a time in this country, the safest place, the safest arms that you could have been in Black arms. Yeah. The safest place to be, as opposed to someplace outside of the Black community, was with each other in our own community. A lot of us can't fathom that because of what the media keeps saying about how dangerous it all is. But for a while there, the safest place we could be was with each other. And we built metropolises. You've heard about Black Wall Street. You know, there was a similar community here in Baltimore. And all over the country, we thrived because we work together. But what keeps happening, and you know, think about the exception thing wherever you want to in your psyche, is that we keep getting so caught up in our capacity to be successful and do well that we forget to defend ourselves. Because on an unconscious basis, which is deep and has to do with brainwashing, we think that if we do well, they'll leave us alone. So we don't defend ourselves. Well, there's all kinds of examples of it. Because we did well, they came after us. Because we did well, they came after us. I'd say it one more time. Because we did well. Because we blatantly defied the psychotic myth of white supremacy in their face. I mean, that's how Trump became president. I mean, I wasn't a big fan of Obama per se, but I do know they said, well, wait a minute. We had Michelle in the White House, who was obviously Black, and we had Obama, who was Black on occasion, in the White House. This is defying the myth that we're superior. We won't go get somebody like Trump and equal things out again with somebody who's going to be not liberal and tap around like Hillary, but who's going to say, we're going to make America great again for us. And they said it in our face. And they want to replace how the Obama administration messed with the myth of their superiority, because they're constantly attacking anything that messes with that. The sister talked about why don't y'all do the right thing? When you have healthy models that work, why are you using this stuff that doesn't work? That was a rhetorical question, right? Okay, which of that was a rhetorical question? They don't want what works to be used. So let's be clear. Let's not get caught up in this logical perspective of why don't they just do the right thing when they realize something that works? What works for us is a problem for them. They don't like it. So we have to start understanding that there's more than one value system. We're complaining justifiably about a racist system, but we know what happened to the many men who were murdered and women, but predominantly men who were murdered by the cops unarmed, and the juror found the murderer not guilty. With all kinds of video of people bleeding and dying on video, being murdered, splattered with blood, like the little girl that was behind Castile's body when he was dying, and they still were found not guilty, because there's more than one value system here. So stop, in my opinion, looking at people who are like that and asking questions like, why don't they do the right thing? Well, they are doing the right thing. They are doing the right thing. David Smith, that's his name, David Smith? He's doing the right thing. Now, I don't think it's the right thing as far as I'm concerned, but given his agenda, he's doing the right thing. For example, some of us know that Donald Trump, and when I say that, please don't hear me saying, some people make these artificial assumptions that he must like the Democratic Party. Don't assume that. I'm just talking about Trump right now. Don't assume, some other stuff that's going on here, that the promised land is over there. I didn't say that. Right. So you didn't hear that. So get that in case you're thinking that. Anyway, Trump is a womanizing monster, but white women put him in office because of their values. And what was more important was white power over rape. So I just want us to stop wasting our time waiting for the white thing to do the right thing and just have a black thing. Seriously. Yeah, I'm glad. It's always nice to get applause, but I hope you're hearing me. Because I'm gonna close with this. I made some notes because I don't want to ramble. But we've been very successful. We've had great leaders. You've heard of Patrice Lumumba, right? You know what happened to Patrice Lumumba? And do you know why it happened? Do you know who did it? Okay, well, we don't have time to get into that. But look it up. A good brother who was about his people, who was doing well, and Eisenhower, y'all's president, as well as Europe, sliced them into 32 different pieces, literally. So I say that, I could talk about over tour in Haiti. I can talk about Winnie Mandela, who almost nobody talks about because white people have successfully ridden her out of our minds and keeps Nelson in it. That's part of the brainwashing. I just want us to understand that we are sitting in our individuals' chairs here with the power to influence change. One of the things that I talked to Dave about in our last conversation is a project that I want to do called Intentional Black Parenting. And what intentional Black parenting is raising Black children intentionally. The curriculum is usually, baby, go to church, which is already poison, number one. Baby, go to school that has banned your history and get a job, a good job. Or government, G-U-B-M-I-N-T, government. That's the curriculum instead of, and I've literally done scientific research on what I'm here to tell you. I asked the people who in my sample, which was national Black people, how many of you had your parents sit you down and teach you how the white supremacy works? Well, my daddy said, you gotta be twice as good as the white man. That's all they heard. And I said, but that implies that something is twice as wrong with you. You gotta make up for twice as bad because you're twice as bad. Because they don't finish the whole sentence. The sentence is, you gotta work twice as hard because white folks be tripping. That part don't be, it's not in the, and because that part is not in it, the Black child is thinking, okay, I'm twice, because the media's already telling them, David Smith has already told me he's twice as bad, so that's inadvertently reinforcing the myth that something's wrong with him, so he has to work twice as hard to make up for being Black. And that's a very unfortunate, well-intended narrative. Part of a Black intentional guardianship of Black children is to finish the sentence in a way that makes them good, being all right, being who and what they are, as opposed to just having to work twice as hard as some people who are tripping. They're tripping. And I know what I'm talking about when I say they're tripping. They got a problem. Anyway, I may be talking more during the question and answer period, but I just want to underscore the fact that we have done well, we can do well, but Marcus Garvey, so many people, Nat Turner, so many people have not understood, even within our rebellion, how deep the defense needed to be. We have to understand the defense part more. And I think LDS embodies that in terms of defensively challenging policy to make sure that we don't just settle for what they do and throw it in it. But two things, I'm going to really make my point. Check yourself, check how you behave around Black children, including former children, and make sure that you're not behavioral white supremacy bombing Black behavior. Because we are very powerful. But like the brother said, sometimes we hurt ourselves, but we didn't always do that. Like to the level that we're doing now. And that's what I want us to remember. We have been going through a situation whereby close proximity over time, we're tripping. Yeah. But not because we naturally are designed to trip, we're under siege. And we all can do something about it with our behavior. And a lot of our children don't know our history. I'm gonna close, I promise, because we talk a lot because we have 50 years worth of stuff to say, some of us. We did a workshop at the Black Men's Exchange on demystifying myths about Black men. And there's all these positive things that Black men have done. And there was a young man in our course who said, they must not be talking about men in Baltimore. And all of our data was from Baltimore. And it was positive things that Black men have done, and define statistics about most Black men being in jail, then in college, and these other myths. But some people got mad. They were mad about how dare you F with my anti-Black perspective. Right. It's my religion. How dare you? Well, we're in a position as grown folks who are in the presence of children to put them on a different trajectory, particularly when we look at how we act. Because some of us inadvertently teach these children to be anti-Black. And what's the dude in Chicago? Raise rushes. we inadvertently raise these people. So that's all I'm going to say for now. We'll talk later.
All right, so we have time for a few questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have all the folks that have, or as many folks as we can, ask questions, and then I'll allow the panel to address whichever question they want to address. So I'm going to start here. We're tight on time. Questions. We'll start here.
My question is, if we're talking about Freddie Gray, the media, I need to know why we're not standing up for Malcolm Mosley.
Yeah.
Right here, question here.
Y'all talk about Freddie Gray in the media. I'm a prime example of a victim of the media. I was called a terrorist. You know what I'm saying? And nobody in this room stood up for me. Nobody in this room stood up for me. I had to fight the police and defend myself in a court of law. I won my case. And ain't nobody stood up for me since then. Y'all know what I do in this city. I don't do this with nobody's money. I do this with the community. You know what I'm saying? So my question is, what y'all gonna do about the rest of us? We got the haves versus the have-nots. I'm over here in the have-nots district. You feel what I'm saying? Because y'all, they ain't helping me. GOP Carter tell you how long I've been going to Annapolis. And I don't get paid to do that. You feel me? I don't get paid to do none of this. I'm fighting for yours, mine, and ours, because my son was killed in 2006. I can't bring my son back, but I got to raise yours, mine, and ours. How long I've been doing this? We had that conversation about the what they call that, the birth of a nation. Ain't we living that now? Our black value in our black communities. We got to learn how to stand up and fight. Do Fox run anything live when I show up? 5 o'clock in the morning, I shut them down. Yes, I'm gonna stop.
Appreciate that, bro.
All right.
All right.
Let this be known. Y'all got to stand up and fight, not these conversations. Stand up and fight.
Got it. All right, I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna go back and come back around. Go right here.
In the last financial reporting of the various people running for office right now, I noticed that David Smith is really pumping money into certain candidates and certain.
Come on, y'all.
So, how do you read how he's spreading his money? He and another person have a super PAC that they formed to support Sheila Dixon to the tune of $200,000 in the last reporting, and individually they've been giving money like that too.
We'll come back here.
So yeah, my question was also similar to that about Sinclair's influence on local elections, but I'll add to that and say that David Smith also self-funded a ballot question that is looking to cut the number of city council members. And so it's always scary when corporate millionaires have such they wield their financial power as political power. And so I'm wondering if anyone on the panel can speak to that and speak to what we should be prepared for and how community members can raise more awareness about about this issue.
Okay, I'm gonna take two more. I'm gonna go here, and then I'm gonna come back this way to the brother.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you, Senator Carter. Good to see you, Brother Dixon. It sounds like all of this always comes down to money. At what point, if I mess with any of you right now or say something wrong about you, if I was to go badmouth Senator Carter, she would just say, don't listen to him and ignore me. Why do we keep giving him this power to keep watching the station? We talk about it's his money. He should be able to do what he wants to do with it. I don't want you telling me what I do with my money. If he wants to support it, create a super PAC, he should be able to do that. When are we going to create our own systems and stop expecting people to do for us? That's my point. We can't keep asking people, it's his money, he can do whatever he wants. We have to stop begging them and trying to get them to side with us. It's their money. And I'm preaching what you said. You said create something black. Let's do the black thing. Our music is bad. We always talk about these kids, what they're doing. If they're being influenced, it's a perpetual system. When can we just say, okay, put the brakes on? This brother's doing a lot of work. We can just hit the brakes on it, let them keep theirs, and we get our own. That's it. Thank you.
All right, one more. I'm gonna do the brother back here. I'm sorry, we got the brother right here. Yep, you with the gray shirt.
My name is Dante. A lot of the things that you guys spoke on about being a broken child, I was that child. I went through the system, but I'm a member of the National Society of Leadership and Success at the University of Baltimore. I graduated this May.
Oh,
my question is, how do I become a part of this Black Lives Matter movement? become a part of this conversation, because I feel as though, because I've come from the impoverished communities that we're speaking about, I feel like the room that I'm in, I feel insecure being in it because of how I grew up, living in abandoned homes in East Baltimore, mom not having anything, trying to raise a child, being a child herself. So how do I become a part of this movement that I want to be a part of, but because of my past, I don't know how to.
All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to address a few of the questions, and then I'll let the panel address, whatever of what they heard they want to respond to. I'm going to say two things. One is that politics is warfare, right? Warfare is politics that spills out of the back room. I think too often Black people are conditioned to see ourselves as needing to petition this larger society to respect and recognize our humanity. So the basis for LBS in terms of how we organize and operate is recognizing that we're engaged in political warfare against a system that wants to undermine our humanity and to advance their position in the society. That's an important frame, because when we think about David Smith and the importance of challenging the media narrative that we've talked about throughout this event, and it's important for us to recognize that as a result of the differential in terms of access to resources, too many of our elected officials, right, are dependent on the very forces that are enemies of our community. And so part of the work that needs to be done is building an independent Black electoral infrastructure so that we're not reliant, so our elected officials are not reliant on those systems that are doing us harm. And so we need to, a part of us in understanding the monies that folks who are candidates for public office, we need to know that if they're receiving money from Sinclair Broadcasting, that they intend on advancing the agenda, right, of Sinclair Broadcasting. That people who are elected office or people running for office are not individual people, right? They are people who are extensions of particular kinds of interests. And so it's important for us to know the kinds of resources that folks are putting into it. And so whoever it is, when we see particular folks in the media, one of the brothers mentioned Marilyn Mosby, right, and the policy positions that she took against the mass incarceration. We're talking about Senator Carter and the attacks on Senator Carter from Fox 45, right? These are all attacks against a perspective that looks to address the concerns of our community, folks who dare to be independent of the establishment. I think that's something for us to take stock of. So I'll stop there and I'll let our panelists respond to any and all of the things that were mentioned before.
I don't want to sound so biomedical or anything like that, but this is only part of what I think we need to do, not those panelists see it, but we need to look at mental health. We've been ran crazy. And the brother talked about doing what he's doing, and when he looks around, I'm paraphrasing, he hears crickets. Because we always second guess whether we should support each other or not. And some of us still remember what happened to Malcolm and Martin, and these people who were murdered, and we're fearful. But we gotta either be soldiers for Black power or not.
That's right.
We gotta do it or not. As some funk group said, ain't no half step. You gotta do it, or else we're gonna stay in this situation. I'll just mention that, and this is connected to mental health, is that seriously, some of us are traumatized into logical submission. Our logic has been. We have to be proactively involved in taking to being in war against the war on us, and it's not a passive thing. Like Devon just mentioned, we're in a war, and for some of us that's depressing. So we get submissive and we shut down. We don't do nothing. Well, that ain't gonna work. That's not gonna change things for us. And I use babies and children to help motivate you. Is that if you want a new experience for Black children, we have to create. It's not gonna come into a white Jesus. Right. It's not gonna come through Santa Claus. Yeah. It's not gonna come through calling each other names that start with you Black, blah, blah, blah. Right. That's part of the injury that we do to each other's spirits. And so I don't have time to get into things formulaically that I would like to regarding solutions, but I'll invite LBS to have solutions only focused on. Where we start, of course, contextualizing, which they do profoundly well, but have most of the conversation, a checklist of solutions. But unfortunately, for some people, that means you're going to be different. You're going to be less passive, less calm, and be more proactive, like LBS. People care. This is not a war. You can't be passive. You're ready to work.
Thank you. I'm going to be quick. I want to thank you, LBS, as well, for all of you that took the time to stay here and listen to this conversation. I try to take a brief note on every question. So, Dante, I'm sure there are dozens of people in this room that will connect with you and share information. I'm one of them. So, on my way out, I'm going to share my information in exchange. I really appreciated your story, and I really appreciated you speaking up the way you did. And I think it bothers me that you would have any sense of not feeling comfortable in a situation like this, because we're your people and your family, and we have like interests. The situation with Sinclair, interest against our community have been financing everybody's campaign for a long time. Very few Black people are independently wealthy, where the money comes from. Black people generally don't fund Black campaigns. Yes, we donate money to like Obama or somebody on a national level that's running on a low level for the most part. But when our own local city council people, when state legislators are running, we don't really give that much money. I think extraordinarily fortunate and unique. This long, with very little money coming from the which I represent. So I should just say very little money, period. So that's a whole nother conversation. And if you want people to, you gotta finance their campaigns. And David Smith is financing more than just Sheila Dixon's. That's just what came out in the news. And I think now that Theroux is in there, he's gonna give a run for the money because they like him better than her. I agree on the Marilyn Mosby. She's absolutely targeted, and we've seen consistently Black women in particular being targeted in a way that our male and white counterparts are not. And it's always comes down to some ridiculousness about our personality, or we were angry or too aggressive, all that stuff. So I agree with Shorty mentioned. Shorty, one thing I'm going to say is you talked about people not standing up for you. I'm sure everybody in this room has had a point in their life where they felt attacked or targeted, but where are the people standing up for you? We've all had that, and I think that's just a message to all of us to do a better job at supporting and standing up for each other, because never for the grace of God go each of us when you see one of us under attack. Finally, we have some institutions already that exist that are too weak, that don't do enough, that are heavily supported because they don't do enough. And I think that we've got to look at, with this media war that we're in, our Black entities that exist, like the Afro, like the Beat that is sitting right here on this table, and figure out how to be more involved with building those up and making sure that the proper narrative. The problem that they have is too little distribution. So the Fox is on there every day saying the same story every single day for 6 months. One little teeny story in the Afro that's distributed to a minuscule number is not going to counter it. And so we got to look at building up our institutions with our own narratives and our own stories in a way that they had to do in the 60s and 70s. All right, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Hey, so real quick to Dr. Monago's point, just a couple solutions. Number one, I likewise really appreciate the young brother standing up, getting ready to graduate from University of Baltimore. So there's a number of places for that brother to volunteer. But the other thing that I want to lift up to everybody in this room, if you are not already actively volunteering with a Black-led nonprofit or youth serving organization in the city, go and do that right away. Go and do that right away. We talk oftentimes about funding, et cetera, but there's lots of other things you can do to support nonprofit organizations here in Baltimore. Sometimes the least of which is funding. You could go and help organize field trips. You could help, again, volunteer to work directly with them. There are so many things that we can do, again, from an assets perspective to help get into the game. The last thing that I want to say, just in general, too, mention about the industrial nonprofit, the industrial complex here in Baltimore and nationally, is this idea that oftentimes folks always want to go and start something new, right? And instead, folks a lot of times are not even going and volunteer to see what the work is actually before when they go, they take up a bunch of time and energy and resources to start something new. So again, if anybody is looking for, right, or needs additional resources, there's a bunch of dope organizations represented here in this room. I'm gonna give maybe that could even be a project. We can even publish a list of like dope volunteer opportunities for Black-led organizations. I think that would be an amazing resource for lots of opportunity for folks in this room and beyond to get in the game.
All right, I'll definitely be quick at this point. Because there was so much. I'm going to go back to the money. I mean, you brought back up the nonprofit industrial complex, and the question about money, not a Black-led organization, the March of Dimes. Y'all know why the March of Dimes is called the March of Dimes? Because it legitimately started with donating a dime at a time, okay? When we think about who's funding whom, whether it's our organizations or whether it's our politicians, we've got to think about where are we putting our dimes. And so at the beginning of this, you know, Adam mentioned that you can become a sustainer of LBS. There are other organizations that are looking for regular, consistent funding to do what it is we're all saying needs to be done. But we don't do it. We're not putting our dimes where they need to go in order to sustain our life. We are literally in a life or death situation. We are literally at the point where it's put up, not even shut up, or get shut up in a system. Okay? And so what we've got to think about is how do we counter this? And I appreciate you. It's how do we counter it? Not how does another media system counter it, not how does the nonprofit industrial complex support us, but how do we counter this? How do we put our dimes where they need to be for true change to happen? And part of that is stopping the infighting. Not I'm only going to give to LBS. I'm not going to give to this other organization. I'm not going out for justice. Oh, the NAACP is irrelevant. Oh, the Afro. Isn't that the Black newspaper? Well, I don't want to read that newspaper. They're only going to talk about Black things. Really think about what we do, how we do it, when we do it, and keep doing it. And that starts with the dime. And I'm serious. Every one of us, we might only got, like that extra $2 between paychecks. We live in month to month, week to week, check to check. This is more than foregoing a cup of coffee. This is figuring out where, if all you got is a dime, we put that dime. Because as we say in the islands, every little bit adds up. And that's what happened.
I want to thank everybody for coming out. Please sign up to be, a sustainer, as Adam mentioned at the beginning, if you support the work. Also, if you want to sign up to be on our action alerts, we've been working to try to stop this juvenile justice bill that's going to incarcerate more of our young people. So please sign up to be on our email list. We're going to send out action alerts. We sent out action alerts this past week. It's important for you to contact your legislator because that helps us provide the leverage to push back against the legislation that's before us. Again, I want to thank you all for coming out. Safe travel.